Hi guys, welcome back to yet another fun DIY sailboat refit weekend here aboard Athena. After a very busy and action-packed summer replacing the entire deck, I feel like I'm finally on the home stretch. And that's a good thing because after next weekend, Athena is going to be moved out of this shed out into the rain and snow. In my last video, I asked for suggestions on what to do about the low spot up near the forward hatch. The great hive mind for once seemed to be pretty much in consensus, the common theme being to fill the low spot with extra glass to limit the thickness of the fairing compound, so that is exactly what I did. The next day I came back and I applied the first layer of fairing compound, and this is what I'm left with. Now this does look a little rough around the edges. I used a level wrapped in masking tape to make sure I didn't have a lot of excess fairing compound on there, and that has left the surface, well, like I said, a little rough around the edges. But that's okay, a quick sanding and an additional layer of fairing compound, and I doubt anybody will ever be able to tell that there was a 1 centimeter low spot in this area right here. Since publishing the last video, I've also applied fairing compound to all of the horizontal surfaces on the deck, with the exception of the radius out here near the edge of the deck, but I think we'll get back to that a little later in this video. I've also finished sanding the most forward area of the deck here, but don't worry, there's plenty of sanding fun left to be had this weekend. The astute will have noted that I've applied fairing compound in two slightly different ways here on the deck. Up to right around here, I've applied a very thin layer of fairing compound, and then from here and going aft, I've applied about 1 millimeter to the entire deck. Now you might be wondering why the heck I would want to do that, and to be absolutely honest, it is purely an experiment for my own amusement and to get some practice. Because the entire deck will be covered by non-skid, which is a matte and slightly textured surface, I'm pretty sure there won't be any visible difference between these two areas, and therein lies my little experiment. Now, as far as the practice part, that is because of the cabin top. The cabin top is going to get a semi-glossy paint, and that is going to show up any kind of imperfections a lot more than the non-skid will, so I'll need to up my fairing game on the cabin top, and getting a bit of practice before doing that seemed like a very good idea. I would like to be ready to start painting next weekend. That is a lot of work, primarily sanding, so I better go ahead and get busy. Ta-da! My new best friend. Before anybody gets their pantaloons all up in a bunch, I am just going to be using the belt sander on this small section up here to knock down the rough surface. And for stuff like that, this Bosch BPS 75 AE is pretty dang awesome. I could easily see this becoming one of my favorite tools if I did more of this kind of work. I think I've knocked down as much of this as I want to. I think this is ready for a second layer of fairing. I think most of you know what that means. It's back to sanding in its purest form. Of course, that means sanding by hand. But we are not barbarians around here, so I've got the slightly more luxurious model that can be hooked up to a vacuum. Good morning, guys. It is Sunday morning. Yesterday was an absolute delight. I ended up sanding for 10 straight hours, and that really makes you appreciate, well, not sanding. In 2012, I fell down a flight of stairs, and as a permanent reminder of that stupidity, I've got a bit of nerve damage in my lower back, and sadly that often ends up being the limiting factor for how much work I can put in at any given day. And after about 12 hours here aboard Athena yesterday, I decided to call it quits. I got the entire deck taken care of yesterday, and I'm pretty happy with the result. There are some pinholes, but I was expecting those. I used a pencil to draw a small circle around all of the imperfections I noticed, and those should be easy to take care of later this week. After I was done with all of that delightful sanding, I then started fairing the edge of the core. It's not perfect yet, but it is slowly getting there. By the end of today, I hope to have the edge of the core faired all the way around the deck. And I'm kind of glad I didn't finish it yesterday, because now I get to show you guys the goopy mess in daylight. Even if I didn't have those annoying issues with my lower back, I still wouldn't have been able to finish fairing all of the edge of the core, because I didn't have enough of these plastic doohickeys. So yeah, I'm basically waiting for the hardware store to open so that I can go pick up some more of these. But until then, we can go ahead and attach the two I've got left. This gets attached to the deck with a bit of double-sided tape. But of course, the first step is to figure out where to attach this. And for that, I've got this doohickey. To the untrained eye, this might just look like a stir stick with some plywood glue to it and some plastic tape to that. But that's not all this is, because this is a high-precision, high-tech measuring doohickey. See? It'll allow me to put a dot right there, which is exactly 9 centimeters from the edge of the hull. Just like that. Being serious for just a second, I'm sure some of you are wondering why I'd go through the trouble of adhering this to the deck instead of just using the edge of the hull as a guide. And that has to do with the shape of the hull. As we move along the side of the hull, the angle between the deck and the hull changes. So up here near the bow of the boat, the angle is, well, something like that. I've moved a little further aft, and if we take a look at the same angle here, it's not like this anymore, it's actually like this. This change in the angle makes it difficult for me to use the hull as a guide. I figured that out when I was trying to round over the edge of the core. Because of that angle, I'm not able to use a fence that extends down on the side of the hull. I would only be able to use a specific point on this radius here, which is kind of fiddly and difficult to do. Hence the need for these plastic doohickeys. I used the same principle when I rounded over the core in the deck. Back then I used screws to attach this to the core, but I'd much prefer not to penetrate my new top skin with a bazillion screw holes, and I figured double-sided tape might be a good solution. As far as my choice of double-sided tape, I went with this stuff from Tesco, which has a foam core. Getting this stuff to adhere to the plastic doohickey is pretty straightforward, and judging by the piece I put on the deck yesterday, it's still on there, so that's a good sign. Of course, there is going to be a little bit of cleanup involved in removing the double-sided tape, but I figured that was much better than to have a ton of holes in the top skin. I've already vacuumed the surface and wiped it down just to give the tape a fighting chance, so now it's just a matter of peeling back this and lining up the plastic doohickey. I've placed a little dot every roughly 10 centimeters using my little high-tech doohickey, so this is pretty easy to line up. And that's another section done. This was my last one, so I can't put off the trip to the hardware store anymore. New supplies thusly acquired from the hardware store. I can go ahead and get these adhered to the hull, but before I do that, there's something else I want to take care of. What I'm about to do is something I've been looking forward to for weeks. And That is, of course, to remove the excess fiberglass covering up the openings for the port lights. Woohoo! I know it's kind of silly, but I've been looking forward to opening up these port lights for weeks. And seeing Athena like this has me kind of excited. I feel like I'm finally starting to get somewhere with this refit. But of course, there's still plenty of work to do. This is one of the port lights that has a bulkhead going down the middle of it, so I can't cut the fiberglass from the inside because of the bulkhead. And I think the blade on my jigsaw is way too long, and that's going to ram into the bulkhead. So I'm going to try using some stir sticks as spacers. Now, if you think this looks a little bit dodgy, I would be inclined to agree with you, but yeah, let's give this a go. Ta-da! The edges are still kind of jagged and uneven, but a flush trimming bit should make short work of that. Ta-da! It is still a little bit uneven, but that's okay. At least I know now that the port light will fit into the opening. Ta-da! All of the port lights are now taken care of, and look who showed up to lend a hand for the last few hours. With Thomas here to lend a hand, it shouldn't take long to attach the last of the two plastic doohickeys to the deck, and then we can start fairing that edge. And that's the last item on my to-do list here aboard Athena for today. Plastic doohickey thusly attached, now it's time to mix up some goop. The epoxy is nice and toasty here inside the insulated box, so even though today is a relatively cool day, it's still going to be very easy to pump and to mix. I've been using these reusable containers instead of the regular plastic cups for the last week, and so far they've worked out pretty good. The majority of the old dried up fairing compound just snaps out of there, and the rest is pretty easy just to break off. And also kind of therapeutic. This is the little jig I've built to fair the edge of the core. It's 3mm plywood that has a stir stick adhered to it with a couple of fillets, and then there's another stir stick here that allows me to adjust the angle of the jig. The process is quite simple. It's just a matter of putting on plenty of thickened epoxy, and then just use the jig along the plastic doohickeys. We're done with the starboard side. Now, there is room for improvement in my jig design. It doesn't leave as nice of a surface as I would have liked, but I think it's something I can work with. There are a ton of tiny craters in the surface here. I don't know if those are going to show up on camera, but I think that's because of a little design flaw in my jig. But the important thing to me is that this edge out here is parallel to the edge of the hull. Now it's just a matter of cleaning up the excess, and then I'll be done for today. And just like that, the new edge is done. And I know it looks a little rough around the edges, but that is nothing a bit of sandpaper and some more fairing compound can't fix. I am very much out of time for today. In fact, it's already way past 5 o'clock, and the only reason I think I might be able to get this video out on time is because I've switched to using Final Cut, and that has cut down on my rendering time. In fact, it's cut it down by over an hour. But before I go, I want to give a big thank you to those of you who left helpful comments on my last video in response to my question about how I should form the edge of the core on the deck. This jig is what I came up with based on those suggestions. But like I said, I've got some ideas on how to improve on this, but I think that's going to be a topic for another video. And that basically wraps up this video. I'll see you guys again next weekend for hopefully a lot of painting, but we'll see. As always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like. See you!